You're listening to My Inner Teacher with Peter Sterios and Crystal Ariel. The answers you seek are within you.
Scott, I'm really happy to see you again and really excited about chatting with you in this context. Because when we had a chat on Retreat Builder, which by the way, Peter, we met on Instagram. I met Scott on Instagram. I just reached out to him and I said, "Hey, Scott, I love what you're doing. Do you want to chat on Retreat Builder?" And he was like, "Yeah, sounds good. Let's set it up." So that's how we met. And we had a really beautiful conversation about the dark and his journey. So I think it's going to translate beautifully into everything that you're doing here with my inner teacher.
It sounds exciting. I'm into darkness.
Good. Well, maybe we can start with what led you into the. Well, first I want to ask you this because I didn't ask you this last time. I saw that you met your wife at a music festival, and I was interested to know what kind of music festival it was.
It was a bluegrass festival called Hardly Strictly. It's this huge free bluegrass festival in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. We didn't quite meet. We saw each other. I saw her dancing. She saw me dancing. We never talked. And then 6 months later, we ran into each other at an event and remembered each other. And that was 15 years ago. No,
Wow.
18 years ago. Yeah.
That's a story.
And
That's
then,
an amazing
yeah,
story.
I know. So random, but not at the same time.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Mm.
So
And then you
Scott, I
guys
have a
got
question.
together
Oh,
and started doing
Oh,
the dark retreats? Or you started
um,
playing with the darkness?
yeah, so it was a slow beginning for us of just kind of coming together at certain points in time. I mean, in those days, we were both quite kind of gypsies, just traveling around, no real location. And so we'd come together at times, we'd travel for periods of time. In those days, I would spend my winters down in southern Baja, north of Cabo. There's a little desert oasis that I would go to. And I'd go up there and I'd spend 4 to 6 months alone up in the mountains there. And some of the years in the earlier days of us being together, Jill would come with me and we'd be up there together for a few months. We'd come down once a week and get food. We'd spend our days alone. We'd come together in the morning to eat together and then in the evening, but we'd spend the majority of the day alone up there. And somebody mentioned a darkness retreat to me in 2011. And in 2012, Jill and I blacked out our house together and we did our first dark retreat together then. And then I went back down to Baja the next spring and I did my first solo dark retreat. She wasn't as taken as I was. I mean, she's not as extreme as I am either. So darkness retreats, it's quite an extreme practice. And so it definitely lit me up a bit more than her. And then 10 years later, we did our first one together in 2012. And 10 years later, 3 years ago, we did another one together.
when you invite the public, I mean, I'm assuming now you're taking people on darkness journeys with you. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've had over 500 people here throughout the last 5 years.
And is it guided in a way, or is it similar to, let's say, Vipassana, where it's also in silence, where there's no.
It's guided, supported, held. I mean, I would, like a disclaimer for Dark Retreat is that it really matters where you do it. Like going into the dark in one place is going to be very different than going into another. And this is beyond the actual facility. That does play into it of like where it is. There's some in Mexico where like it's pretty noisy and like there's people on the second floor above. And so where it is actually has an impact, but who's holding the container, how it's held, their depth of experience in being in the dark and being supported by others and getting reflection and seeing in different ways and also being with different people really has quite an impact and is actually quite significant. I'd say the types of experiences people have here has a lot to do with the support, how it's held, and the years of us being with different people and noticing different things of what happens when someone goes into the dark, and that 90% of people who go into the dark go in, and maybe even more than that, but 90% go into and would likely stay in without proper support in some kind of survival response, in some kind of coping strategy, safety mechanism, because the darkness is initially a stressor. It initially feels really threatening. And most people without qualified, experienced support would stay in that and would have no idea that they're doing something because they actually feel unsafe. They feel threatened in their body. And we see it, it happens all the time where I could go up and so we have check-ins every morning and evening. I go up and there's through the wall, through the door, we hear each other and we talk half an hour, 45 minutes. And then before that, they have a 2-hour session with my other teammate, Adrian, before they go into the dark and when they come out. So there's a lot of like, it's bookend with this 2-hour session. And then there's the support morning and evening. And it happens all the time where I could go up and somebody's like, I feel safe, I feel relaxed, I feel comfortable, but they're doing something. And from being here with so many people, I can read between the lines. I mean, and sometimes I miss the mark, but like it could, and we learn so much from each person because everyone who comes here is organized differently. They're insulating differently. And so we see more and more of different structures and how they respond and react in the dark. And so people can say, and on some level feel comfortable, relaxed, but they may be numb. They may be totally dissociated. They may be like in their mind. They may be using meditation as a way of controlling themselves because they feel scared. You know, they may be doing a certain kind of breath work that within their interior feels like it's really opening them, but it's a subtle way that they're controlling themselves because they're bored, because it's so simple and they feel like they should be having a peak experience. Like, so that support and the way that it's held definitely is instrumental and is really essential in people genuinely dropping into their body in a felt sense of safety and really relaxing into the simplicity that is the darkness.
Crystal, have you done it?
No, but I've been following Sky Cave retreats for a while, and I'm just fascinated by the idea. It feels scary to me because I have issues, let's just say, with darkness. But I mean, especially on this topic of finding your inner teacher, it seems like, it could be a really great path to do that because I mean, Scott talks a lot about how we're overly stimulated and it blocks all of that out so that really you are faced with yourself and that's it.
You know, and I'd say on that note, Crystal, like what we've seen over the years, and I would have felt differently if we had this talk 3 or 4 years ago, where if somebody was scared, I'd be like, maybe this isn't for you. But what I've come to see now is that the majority, not everyone, but pretty close to everyone who comes who is not scared is usually using a sense of armor. They're so insulated and so protected that they're not scared, but it's not a real sense of safety. It's not a real not being scared. It's like a postured and insulated and armored. They're not scared because they could do anything and they can overcome and push through and pierce. But that's just like, that doesn't work in the dark. It gets exhausting in the dark. And some people, I mean, everyone has different coping strategies and unconscious safety mechanisms. And so some people are so insulated or numb that they're not scared because they don't feel that much. And it's actually the people who are able to be like, I'm scared on some way. And it doesn't have to be. Some people genuinely aren't that scared, but most people are. And a lot of people aren't able to even be in touch with that. I mean, especially as a man in our culture, to admit that you're scared, you're almost a failure. Like, it's not a good thing as a man to admit you're scared. I mean, even on an animalistic level, you're at risk of being attacked or being, so like, just from there's culture and then there's the animal, there's so much in us that's like, you can't be scared. And if you are scared, you just get stronger, you get bigger. And so that's what happens when people go in the dark, but then that almost like it inhibits an honesty, it inhibits a humility, and it overlays this idea that we're supposed to be strong, as opposed to what if we're just vulnerable and honest and humble and sincere. And so if somebody is able to be like, I'm scared, and there's like a receptivity, there's an openness in that really has them being able to really attune to the unknown. And when you go into the darkness, it's unknown. And if you go in feeling strong and like, I've got this in a way that's kind of postured, you're going to kind of carry that in the dark of being kind of held in a way, as opposed to what if it's okay to be afraid? Like, what if it's genuinely okay to be scared and you don't need to try to change it? Now, this is different, whereas fear is part of us. We need fear to navigate in the world. There is times where fear is appropriate and we need to act on it. But in a container where, at least logically, you know that you're safe and you know that nothing's going to harm you. Now you have, it doesn't mean you're going to feel safe, but at least cognitively, you have a safe place where you can be afraid and not need to change it. What happens in your interior and in your psyche and we're with people in these ways where we establish a felt sense of safety, where it's like people may be like, you're sitting in a chair. What does it feel like to feel the back of your body and where it meets the chair? Like, is there any part of your body that feels safe, that feels soft, that feels comfortable, that feels relaxed? Like, we really work with people in establishing a felt sense of safety in their body. And then there's a container where they can then navigate these other parts of themselves. And so from there, what if it's okay to be afraid and you don't need to change it? Like, what happens in you then? And that becomes like when somebody genuinely opens and drops in the dark, every single person passes through these membranes of like fear, shame, sadness, anger, all of these things. But it takes somebody being willing to be in that and not try to change it. It's really this sense of nurture and this sense of meeting that really has somebody moving into that, not a sense of like, I've got this or I'm strong enough. It's more like, whoa, I don't know. What is this like? What does it feel like in my body to be afraid?
Scott, do you practice yoga?
Like asana yoga?
Yeah, which is whatever you relate to the word yoga. The reason I ask, your languaging is almost identical to some of the languaging I use when I'm teaching yoga. And I find the coincidence here of your languaging to be remarkable. And I'm ready to sign up for your next retreat, you know?
Yeah. I don't really, I haven't, no, I don't really practice yoga. I mean, there was a time, I guess I never really got into asana and like having a yoga practice in that way. A little bit, but not like deep into it. And there's definitely been times in my life in terms of like meditation, and I was really into Vipassana in the Goenkaji 10-day Vipassana styles for a while. I've probably sat 25 plus courses over many years. I haven't in a while. And I mean, one unique thing that I found, which was quite crushing for me, was that there's no level of experience. Like, there's no level of meditation experience, breath work, plant medicine, cold plunge exposure, any of that actually prepares someone for a dark retreat. We actually find more often than not, it actually makes it more difficult for people because it's just it's more adding, it's more stuff. It gives people more sophisticated ways of controlling themselves. It gives people more sophisticated tools for overcoming negative emotions, for manifesting cultural ideas or ideals of how they're supposed to be. It adds more. And then the darkness it's a subtraction of everything. So everything you're adding kind of creates this, you're trying to like create a certain kind of experience that just isn't necessarily what's there. And that doesn't mean some of those tools can be helpful for people, not taking it all away, but more often than not, it adds more difficulty. And the people who come, who really settle in, It's not based on techniques that they've had. It's really like a sincerity, a willingness to be uncomfortable without trying to change it, without trying to use techniques and tools to like create our ideal. It's really the humility and the honesty to be as we are and not as we think we are, not as we want to be, not as we like show ourselves in the world, but to totally be crushed and not have anything to show for yourself. And then it's through that window that somebody touches what's beyond kind of the idea of how we're supposed to be. And that was crushing for me. When I did my first dark retreat, I had years of experience being alone. I could meditate sitting on that same rock up in Mexico for 14, 16 hours a day, fasting for a couple weeks. Like I was definitely the ultimate spiritual achiever. And like, you know, I just took my like, as I got disillusioned with the world, I took that sense of achieving and progress and purpose and just kind of brought it over to spirituality. And it served me for a while. I was quite good at like putting myself into ecstatic and blissful states for hours through singing and chanting, but it created more armor, more ideas of how I was and how I should be. And so when I went into the dark, I felt my first time alone, I was shocked by how hard it was. Like I could actually feel when I would go to like meditate and do the thing I would do, I could feel how it didn't feel natural. I could feel the contraction in my system, like, oh, fuck, like it's like a mechanism of control. And I could begin to see the subtleties of that. And when people would start coming, and there were some people who came who had no solitude, never been alone, never meditated, never done a retreat, never had therapy or breath work, nothing. And in the early days, I was like, well, I don't think this person should be here. But then witnessing many people like that, and then just my mind would be blown by how deep they dropped in. And I could begin to see that all my stuff that I had was adding, and like our, whatever we want to call it, our essential nature is just there. It doesn't, anything we're doing is almost covering it up. And so the less that we have, the more accessible it is.
I have a 96-year-old father who is generally healthy. But he needs more care now. Obviously, he's a little less stable to be mobile. He uses a walker, and he needs help when he doesn't have the walker, like my arm. And I once a week, I take him out on a joyride, what he calls the joyride. And it's just time that we spend together. He remembers peak moments of his time bringing us up, but he's I asked him, I said, Dad, are you in any kind of pain? And he says, no pain. And as a physical yogi, I'm almost in awe that he's honestly saying he has no pain in his body at 96. And so then I say, well, are you happy? And he said, I'm content. He has these words. He never really says happy, but I can just tell he's not worrying. He's not watching the news. Conversations that we have aren't very deep, and he's forgotten a lot, but there's an innocence and like a simplicity as his world interface is contracting in a way. And again, listening to you talk about that, and then thinking about my father's reality, like he doesn't have as many thoughts to think, he doesn't have as many memories to hold, and yet he's grateful for every moment. And what the environment you create for your guests, how long are they in it unattended? Typically.
Yes, nowadays, in the early days, it was like, I mean, we had no idea what we were doing. We're still learning more from each person, but we have a little bit more of a sense after 500 people. But in the early days, it was like, come as long as you want. So we had people 5 days, 10 days, 15, 21, 30, 40 days. And it was an experiment to see, you know, what's happening, tracking with different people while they're in there. And then we kind of shortened it to allowing people to book anywhere from 3 to 5 days. now after enough years with that, it's like you have 3 days, 4 nights in the dark with a day on either side. So you arrive and you have 24 hours to really settle in. You kind of go into the dark, you come out. We get a sense of what it's like, of how they respond and react in the dark, so that we can we meet everyone where they're at. There could be 3 people. I mean, there's always 3 people up there in the dark. And when I go up there, I have 3 totally different conversations, even if everyone's all on their second day, because they're just meeting everyone where they're at. And there's not like a program of, on this day, you get this and you need to do this. It's just like, I'm there to like support people in having a genuine embodied felt sense of safety, and then just traversing from there. So people are in the dark, typically 3 days and 4 nights. I come up every morning and evening. So maybe the longest time someone's totally alone might be like 12 hours, 12, 14 hours.
They have no concept of time though, right? Because they're in the dark. They don't know if it's day or night or...
Right. I mean, they have some sense, because I'm coming up and I bring food in the evening. In the wintertime, I light a fire in the morning. The fire's on my side, so I light it, and it's a huge 2,000-pound masonry stove that warms up the place. And so they know morning and evening when I come up. But what happens is, in the beginning, people have a big dump of melatonin from the dark. And so people sleep, they nap a lot. And so you don't know, did you just nap for 10 minutes or did you nap for 4 hours? And then when I leave at night, people go to bed. Maybe they go to bed at 9 p.m. They don't know if they woke up at 2 a.m., which happens all the time, or if they woke up at 7 a.m. and I'm going to be there in a couple hours. So even though I'm coming up morning and evening, people definitely still get lost in time and they're totally not sure, which is unsettling. It's so foreign to us to not have a location in time and place. Like, it is really unsettling. And then there's a sense of like, I'll be fine and I'll do it. But there's the animal, like our animal body does not want to be exposed. You're in the dark. Like, the center of the room is a place where most people just don't go. And like, it's not because it's not cozy. It's like, as an animal, who wants to be in the middle of an open space? It's really threatening. That's scary. And so there's different unconscious strategies that people do in the dark to maintain a sense of safety, not an embodied sense of safety, but like a more of a disembodied sense of safety. Like, a lot of people spend a lot of time in bed, because the way the bed is, it's in the corner. There's kind of 3 walls. And from a real unconscious animal kind of orientation, the bed is really safe because you have 3 walls and you're kind of facing the one open side. So, and people don't, it's not a conscious process. It's just happens to be where you feel safe. For myself, in my early days, my unconscious safety strategy was going into freeze and being numb, but it got mixed with my ability to meditate and still and quiet my mind. And so in those days, I was definitely confusing a deep state of meditation with being numb and dissociated. And I would spend a lot of time in bed with my mind completely still. If somebody asked me how it was going, I would have been like, it was totally peaceful. My mind's quiet. I'm relaxed. I had no idea that I was, in a sense, dissociated and numb. It wasn't until really Adrienne came on 3 years ago, and I started to really, she's deeply perceptive. And I started witnessing more people's experiences through her eyes and what she was noticing. And I heard her explaining to someone once of what happens when you go into freeze in the dark. You spend a lot of time in the bed. When you walk around the room, you don't totally feel that safe and comfortable. So you may kind of move quickly. You may feel comfortable in the bathtub, but the rest of the room, it's just not a place you really feel that comfortable. Over those years, I started to notice a bit more of my unconscious mechanisms, and I started to thaw a bit, come more into my body. And last year when I went in the dark, I was like, I'm going to move around the room a lot more. And so at that time I was more embodied. I had more of a like genuine felt sense of safety, and I was comfortable all around the room. It had really changed for me. Although in the past, I wouldn't have been able to even notice that I was in freeze. And like, that's happening all the time for people in their various ways. That's where the support comes in, because you're in an unconscious mechanism. If you knew what was happening, it wouldn't be serving its purpose. You would be feeling the threat that unconscious mechanism is serving. And so that last time I went in last year, I noticed that I didn't want to go into the center of the room. And so I was like, I'm going to sit in the center of the room. And the moment I sat in the center of the room, my entire chest caved in. And like my heart was like a rock. And it was like, and there was no story. It was totally a somatic animal body response of sitting in the center of the room, being totally exposed, that my whole body caved in. And my immediate reaction was to like breathe through it and try to work it out and open it. And like, so then all of a sudden I'm in a reactive kind of trying to fix and cover, but through my spiritual lens, I'm transforming it and working it and helping it. But like, it's really actually not. It took me maybe a minute or two before I realized what I was doing, that I was actually like in a threat response, trying to deal with a threat, as opposed to what if it's okay to feel this way? And for some people, that's too scary to do on their own. Like their nervous system can't actually do that without the support of another. Of like, there's so many times I come up there and somebody's super dysregulated. They may be in a panic attack, and like just the presence of another has them feel safe, that they can begin to get back into their body. And there's been many people there was another woman who was here some months ago, and she was like, because now when we prepare people, we let them know these are some of the responses. These are some of the patterns that people get into. This is how you can recognize it. This is how you use me as a support so that you can like self-reflect through some of my questions or things that you share. And there's a woman, and she's like, I'm noticing that I don't want to go into the middle of the room. I'm okay everywhere else. And I asked her, do you want to explore that a little with me? And she said yes. And before we did that, she was totally relaxed and calm. And the moment she stepped into the center of the room, her body reacted. And it's not like she's afraid someone's going to get her. It's not like a logical response. It's just the body goes into something. Anyway, so we explored more, and she ended up settling in the center of the room, and felt safe after we had a whole process with her in the center of the room. And from there, she was able to be in the center of the room and genuinely feel safe. But it took really letting that contraction in the body be there and letting it work itself out, right? The nervous system has the intelligence to unfurl when we're not gripping and even unconsciously trying to fix, change, and heal, which really just holds it tighter.
That language I use all the time on a yoga mat, what you just described. And the parallels are uncanny. I'm really interested. So basically the interior space that it's one person by themselves, or is it a couple people sharing a space?
One person by themselves.
Okay. And all the amenities, like you talk about eating, what about the other side of the equation, pooping and all that is handled in the space?
Yeah, we don't handle the pooping for them. Yeah, there's a bathroom.
No, I meant, wait, I got to go to the bathroom.
I know what you meant. No, there's a bathroom, there's a sink, there's a toilet, there's a sink, there's a bathtub with hot baths, which I think are pretty unique to our caves here, which people love the bath. I mean, there's so many men who come here who they're like, I don't even know the last time I took a bath. Maybe it was 40 years ago. And like, they're living in the bathtub. It's a safe place, a warm water. People are enfolded. It's another place where people who kind of go numb tend to also feel safe in the bath. And which is another amazing. There was somebody here recently, and he was another classic example of somebody who was going numb and had no idea. And I was like, how's it going? And he's like, I'm relaxed. I'm calm. It's very peaceful. I could tell that wasn't totally grounded and settled in his body. It was likely more something he was doing or some kind of mechanism he was in. And so I asked more questions, and he said, well, I don't like sitting in the food area, which in that particular cave is more in the middle of the room. And he was like, it's really uncomfortable. And first I wasn't sure if it was eating, if the eating was uncomfortable, if it was the space. And I said, what about if you ate in bed? He said, oh, that would be fine. So next time he was in the bath, when I came up, he happened to be in the bath. And just from there, of having him imagine that he was sitting in the center of the room, his body contracted. he was totally relaxed in the bathtub and just imagining he was. And so we got to really play with and explore from a place where he was safe in the bathtub of these other parts of himself, the other parts of the room. And so those are just some of the ways that we explore in there. So there's a hot bath, there's the toilet, there's a sink, there's a yoga mat, there's a foam roller, there's what I'm sitting in now, there's a zero gravity chair, there's a place to roll around, there's the bed, and then there's a little low table and a cushion to eat. So it's a pretty spacious room. And one more thing on that thread of just people feeling threatened in the dark, and like in the unknown ways, one thing we really play with, this is more recently that I've noticed, is that a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people keep their eyes closed. Because if they opened their eyes, they would see the thing that feels threatening. And there's something about keeping their eyes closed which somehow keeps them insulated from the reality of where they really are. And so it happens often where I'll go up and people are sharing how comfortable and relaxed they feel. And just as we explore more, to really just attune to how deep is that relaxation? Is it kind of more like the mind, like you've done something to relax your mind and your body's like not relaxed? And so we explore somatically in the body and do these different explorations. And so we could have somebody who's relaxed, and then we get into their body and their body is genuinely relaxed. They feel safe, they feel comfortable. And then I'll invite them to open their eyes and their whole body will contract and they'll be like, I feel scared. And a moment ago, they were completely safe and relaxed. All they did was open their eyes and just saw the darkness and their body contracted. And so we'll really work with that of establishing safety and then pendulating back and forth with the eyes open. And there might be somebody where we welcome in the darkness or we expand out into the darkness. Like there's so many unique ways to explore in there. That experienced support can lend itself well to exploring in the darkness, but also like getting more honest with where we're feeling threatened and uncomfortable in the dark.
I have a lot of questions, Crystal, but if you want to pop some questions in, this next one, what are some of the common results is the wrong word. Like what changes for people after once or a regular series of these dark space experiences? Like, does I don't know, their psyche must be affected in a big way. And then
definitely,
I would think that the awareness of subconscious contraction is more attuned so that they can sense, oh, gee, I am holding my shoulder up by my ear all day long. Is that the kind, I mean, similar to a yoga practice? I'm curious what you notice or what the kind of package offers in some ways.
Yeah, well, it's mixed. I'd say there's a large spectrum of people. And again, it's like everyone's so different. Everyone's kind of doing the same thing, but they're just doing it differently. And so there's definitely like different ways that people are organized. So this wouldn't apply to everyone, but there is a large amount of people who come to see that they're not as far along as they thought they were. This would be more the spiritually oriented people. There haven't really been many spiritually oriented people who are like, wow, I'm like just as far along as I thought I was. It's usually quite crushing. They're like, I'm not as far. That was my experience too. And it continues to be my experience. It's just like, wow, I'm not as far along as I thought I was. Now, people who aren't spiritually oriented and don't have that, some of those people are like, wow, I'm doing great. Like, because they were more able to be honest. A lot of spiritually oriented people live in their spiritual ideas and they're actually performing spirituality and not even knowing that. And so when you go into the dark, performing doesn't really get you very far. You get no feedback. There's been a few people who are quite advanced and sophisticated in their control mechanisms, and they do keep their head above water in the dark through their and that always blows my mind too, of how advanced their control mechanisms are. And they don't really hit the wall, like the pressure doesn't crush them. They somehow float. So there's that difference, I'd say, for the people who I'd say, so most people do, like you said, become aware on a deeper level of their contractions, of subconscious material, of a bit more of the truth of where they really are. But everyone gets that. But there's a large percentage of those people where that feels too threatening for them. And for some of them, immediately, the moment their system senses it, they're unconsciously in some kind of safety tactic, insulative coping strategy. And so they don't even really know that's happening. For other people, they do see it. And it's for other there, then there's the kind of group of people who do see it, but it's so overwhelming for them that they're dysregulated, and they don't have the genuine capacity to be with it. And they don't have these more sophisticated, advanced coping strategies. And so they're kind of like, they're dysregulated, and it's pretty overwhelming. And then there's the people who like see it, they're able to be honest and humble in it. They have a genuine capacity to be with it, or they drop into an unknown capacity in the dark, or they really were able to co-regulate with us when we came up, and they move through that, and they open into what's underneath that. So everyone doesn't leave elated. And there's a large group who, that's where it's a really delicate journey, because people could be pretty dysregulated in there for a long time. And what's a slippery slope is, imagine somebody gets lost in the desert for 4 days. It's a really horrible experience, but you're going to have some insights. If you're lost in the desert for 4 days, you're going to realize how amazing your life is, how much you love your people. Like, you're going to have these beautiful insights. And when you get rescued, you're going to be so happy. When you come out of the dark, there's going to be so much relief. If somebody watched your video coming out, they're going to be like, that person had an amazing time. They're crying. They're so grateful. But it's really relief. It's not necessarily openness and sensitivity and connectivity. And then when they go and they talk about their story, when they go home, they're going to talk about the good things. Most people. It's just human nature to, like, unless somebody is more conditioned of being really negative, most people are going to talk about the insights they had. And so then the next person's like, I want to go get lost in the desert for 4 days. That sounds amazing. But they left out 95% of the time. They only shared the 5% insight. So it's like, it can be deep. It can be, but it's a really fine edge. And so something that as we continue to evolve, what we explore with is like, the darkness is really confronting. It's really exposing, but it can be, for many people, too much exposure. It can be too much. Like, we have to be honest with where we're at. Every single person has a capacity where too much is too much. Now, but some people have really strong coping strategies. And so when it gets too much, they start doing something. They can get by. They can endure 40 days in darkness, but like, people can endure the craziest shit in this world. That doesn't really mean that there's like an uncovering of like what we really are, of what's underneath all of our persona and our mechanisms. So we have a little red light. It's a little book light that clamps to a book, and it's a red light, and we have it in the rooms. And what we have found is that most people, not given the option or their permission, would never turn on this light, because they would feel so much shame for being a failure. And there's so much pressure in our world, and we're all really good at enduring and pushing through. And so most people would rather be dysregulated and endure the dysregulation, not consciously, but they would endure the dysregulation, the overwhelm, the hardship, than to walk out of the room. And so we really talk with people before they go in that, like, there is no added benefit of enduring the darkness. Like, we endure enough. This isn't an experience of doing something really hard. You are doing something hard, but we really lean into, what would nurture do? And like, that is something we return to again. And it would nurture turn on that light just for a minute and like release some pressure. Orient around the room, get a felt sense of safety in your body from like actually seeing and knowing you're safe, and then turn out the light and go back in. And we have found over and over again that people who genuinely have permission to turn on the light or to come out, whether they do it or not, if they genuinely have permission, when the pressure builds in there and they notice that they're getting overwhelmed or dysregulated, they know that they want to be in there. They're not trapped. It's not that they should be in the dark or they could be in the dark. It's like, I genuinely want to. And when somebody genuinely wants to, their system tends to relax. And when people are like, no, I've got to do it, there's a hardness in that. And so we really ride that edge of like being with people so they notice when they're dysregulated, when they've gone into enduring. And that's a big thing we explore with people, is what does enduring look like? And not everyone's an endurer. So like that's something we tend to pick up and become aware of when people arrive. And in the initial conversations, like, this is a person who's likely going to endure. And how do we invite them to notice what enduring may look like, and invite them more into a sense of nurture of like, this isn't necessarily an experience to endure. Like, let's move into what nurture would do.
This is another reason why I thought that you, Scott, and Peter would have a great conversation, because on Peter's Instagram, it says, soft is the new strong. I know you've talked a lot about softening, like don't put up that hard shell, but allow yourself to soften to the experience. So I don't know, Peter, if you want to talk about softening.
Well, I've done a lot of meditation, and Vipassana meditation included. Some of the descriptions you're using are states of being that I've experienced with Vipassana. And some of the kriyas, these special practices in yoga, like gazing at a candle flame, etc. I'm curious, have you ever heard anyone report that in the blackness, there with eyes open, their gaze, because I practice this with eyes closed, where I'm looking at the blackness of my upper eyelids, and if I focus both eyes, inner gaze in one spot, there's an experience of piercing the blackness. And what is revealed beyond the blackness usually starts with a pinpoint of color, like maroon or purple or deep blue. And with, an hour or two into this practice, sometimes it moves towards light, towards white. And then that brings up this archetypal or just subconscious awareness of death, And I'm curious if in the experience of your dark caves, if people ever, is that experience kind of, well, this must be what death is like. This is that ultimate surrender to the blackness of death, and then opening, this kind of myth or it's been from near-death experiences, people that have returned, they talk about this opening to the light. Is that, you ever make that connection for yourself personally, maybe, or from guests?
Yeah. I'd say that people do come into that. And the people who tend to are the people who like have no context for it, aren't looking for it, never even heard about it, right? Like from what you shared, and then there's somebody who's like, oh yeah, I want that. I'm going to go into the darkness to get that. Those people just never get that, because they're trying, they're doing something, as opposed to it just arising through letting go. Like that state or those states, one could say those are natural to us. And so when we try to replicate it, or we try to perform it or make it happen, now we're back in our persona and our like structure of trying to create it. And so there have been a number of people who have had experiences like that. And those have been the people who blow my mind, because they're just like the most casual, unassuming people who didn't come here for any kind of peak experience or grand awakening. It was just kind of like a curiosity of like, I want to come and see. And so those things can arise in the dark, and it tends to be more from the letting go and the genuinely settling into the space. But for most people, that tends to come with moving through a passage of discomfort first.
Right.
And so there's a lot of, it's amazing to witness the levels of unconscious resistance that most people are in, and they have no idea, like they're resisting the darkness or the fear or sadness. Or, there was somebody up here the other day, and he was sharing, there was a tightness in his chest. And so first we went back to establishing a sense of safety, and we found a place in his body where he felt soft and relaxed, and we stayed there, and then his rest of his body started to relax, and then we went back to his chest that was tight. And it wasn't as tight by the time we got back there, but when we got back there and that space came, and then I invited him to open his eyes, the chest really tightened again. And when I asked him just to notice how his body responds when we ask, what if it's okay to feel this way? And he really took it in and considered it. And the moment he considered it, he's like, there's sadness here. I'm sad now. And just like that, his part of the pressure in the chest was added from resistance, but like underneath it was sadness. And like that unconsciously there was resistance. Like, and as we unpacked it, he could see that he didn't really feel like it was okay to be sad. Sadness is weakness, and like you have to be positive and get over things. And I should have just got over this. I shouldn't be sad. And just the invitation of what if this is okay, all of a sudden he could touch the sadness. And then as we got into it more, he was like, I can feel my guard coming down as he was genuinely allowing sadness. And just like, and it just shows me too, because I see that then in myself of just the lack of permission, the unconscious resistance to like not actually being able to feel those things. And in myself, I now feel like vulnerability in myself tends to show up as weakness. Like when I'm feeling genuinely vulnerable, I feel weak. And so there's a difficulty of like everything in my system is like, why be weak? You know how to be strong. And but that is an invitation that we're really with people of like, what if it's okay? If it feels weak, what if it's okay to feel weak? What's that like in your body to feel weak and actually just tenderly be with it?
I want to know what attracts, well, what was it like to have these athletes and NFL players like Aaron Rodgers come and want to have this experience with you, and like what attracted them to being in the dark?
I think, well, there's been a few. There's Aaron Rodgers. There was some of the NBA stars, Rudy Gobert and Dwight Howard, and the legendary boxer Anthony Joshua. And so they came for different reasons. I think Dwight was inspired by the Instagram videos that he saw. I think Rudy was more inspired by Aaron Rodgers, of hearing about his journey, and when we had a common friend. And Aaron Rodgers is good friends with Aubrey Marcus, who had done a dark retreat. And so I think it was more in that thread of just exploring consciousness, and he was into plant medicine. And so I think each of them were kind of moved. Anthony Joshua was our Instagram. He had seen those. And for a lot of people, they'll see the Instagram and there's something in it where they're like, it just the authenticity, the rawness, the vulnerability, like you don't see that human expression very much, that there's something of like, what is that? How did they get into that? They're not even on any substances. Like it touches something that we know, like there's something real in that's attractive. I mean, it's also repulsive because it feels really scary and uncomfortable to most people, but there's an attraction in that. And then for other people, they're coming for some of those athletes, like just to rest, to have space to contemplate, to get away from all the busyness. Yeah, just like I'd say different. They've all came probably for different kind of reasons.
I really was touched when you were talking about when you go looking for something that you think someone else experienced. That's the block. It's not going to happen. All these mystical experiences I've had was in pure innocence. I hadn't read anything about it. I knew very little about Vipassana when I first went. And I think it is that mental paradox. Like you have these unusual experiences that may be scary. I've had scary, experiences like this that there is a curiosity to go back, to see, revisit it and kind of, and it's elusive. And I think that's maybe even by intention, maybe. I don't know. I'm really moved. Just this conversation moved me. And I think I'm gonna put it in my to-do list.
Uh-huh. Yes,
Yeah,
and that is that, like, where it's the people who have more, stuff, more ideas of spirituality, of what it looks like, of how it's supposed to be. Like, it creates more shoulds as opposed to, oh, like, that's not how I am. I mean, for myself, it's been in the last couple of years has been more devastating than anything else, of really landing in like, whoa, I'm not as far along as I thought I was. I'm not as great as I thought I was. Um, um, all the different realities of like, some people use spirituality and it fills themselves with a sense of grandeur. It fills themselves with a sense of purpose, but it's so righteous and can be presented so beautifully. And then you're going to bring other people into the ecstatic states and the beauty and the healing. And like all of a sudden it's puffed up through spirituality, and now somebody has a beautiful purpose. Like, it's amazing to see when different healers come or therapists come, just there's traps everywhere you look, so it's not to discount everything comes with the trap, so it's not like one trap's not worse off than another, right? But there is this sense of like, when somebody's in a healing profession, they're likely doing that to themselves too. So when they go into the dark and they're feeling afraid or sad or angry, there's going to be an impulse to resolve it, to kind of heal it in the ways that they know how. And they're in their conditioned ways of controlling. And when you're in your program, when you're in your conditioned ways of controlling or resolving or fixing, you're not really settled in your being. You're not settled in that part of you that's actually not trying to control or fix. Now, then the trap might be for that spiritual perspective of like, well, I'm not going to control or fix. It's just okay as it is. But like, the truth is it's really not. And so they might develop a more sophisticated way of kind of what they called in Vipassana, or in Buddhism, it's like dispassion, right? Which, like, for a Westerner, that's a slippery slope of an invitation to be disembodied, to like not almost like lean back and not feel it. That was something that I certainly loved. Now I had permission to dissociate. I called it dispassion, and so just all the different traps. Anyway, back to like the healer one, where there's this movement to heal and to fix, as opposed to just like, what if it's okay to just be broken and not try to fix yourself? And what I've seen with people in the dark is the moment they're just honest with a sense of helplessness or a sense of being broken, they immediately drop into that part of themselves that's okay with being broken. And they're all of a sudden in a sense of wholeness because they're touching that part of them that's not broken. But like, it took them sincerely and genuinely being willing to be broken and not try to resolve it, which would be really hard for someone who's in a healing profession, because their sense of purpose comes from healing people. If you're a healer and you're not healing people, you're kind of not doing your job, and it's pretty a worthless purpose, so it's a pretty hard thing to then not do that for yourself. And that's something that I constantly hit up against. And Adrian is like constantly reflecting to me too, of like, you're not here to fix people. Like, your sense of worth is not based on their experience. You're not responsible for their experience. And to be in that delicate dance of not trying to fix, change, heal, have them have a powerful experience. It's like somebody's bored and it's just like, that's great. I just lay down outside the door and it's like, let's just be bored together and see what happens. Yeah.
Do you know who J.P. Sears is?
Yes. I mean, I've seen some of his things.
Yeah.
For sure.
Do you know his book?
No.
It's called Ultra Spiritual, the 12 and a half Steps to Enlightenment. He's touching on these traps that you talk about. And he's a comedian. He's a celebrity. So at least this day, but that book was timely in my life because I was starting to awaken to this seriousness of a spiritual practice, which is insanity in a way. And your words are so perfectly attuned to that paradox, to that state. when you realize that this is the whole purpose of our podcast, the tagline of the answers you seek are lie within. And how do you come to that understanding is you have to commit to looking inside. And it sounds like this darkness experience is another of these, in a way, maybe who started this idea, who cares, but this spontaneous realization that darkness is a healer. Oh, there's that word again. It's just like,
yeah. I mean, and I don't, not to take out that there's deep healing that takes place in the darkness for sure. It's more just like when we're in our persona trying to be the healer or trying to heal, just noticing the difference of that in contrast to just being with. And then there's a healing that takes place. And that's a real spectrum that we attune to with people on there, that they can kind of like, there's this spectrum. One end of the spectrum is like you're overtly, clearly trying to change. There's fixing, changing, healing, transforming, like you're really trying to work at. And we're all doing it in our own way of like animating our ideas of how we should be, performing different things unconsciously. I mean, like our persona kind of personifies the ideas of, in a way, how we should be, because it kind of gives us a sense of safety. And then the other end of the spectrum of just being receptive, open, relaxed, that can be very boring. You don't have a purpose. You're not doing anything. How do you know you're moving towards your dreams and your ideals? You're just relaxing and feeling like shit, or whatever it is. And one thing we notice, especially for people who are spiritually oriented, and really for most people, but especially that, is simplicity is very threatening. You are nothing special when you're simple. You have nothing great to show for yourself. And like within spirituality, I think a lot of people come to see like they don't really want simplicity. They want a big peak experience, that they have something great to show for themselves, or if you're healing, you're doing the work. There's those traps, but that spectrum of like where you're fixing, changing, and healing, which can look like so many different things. And when you're receptive, available, open, relaxed, in that, healing and transformation can happen. It's just like, it's not you doing it. It's just genuinely emerging as that receptive quality kind of naturally changes things. You're like, what's underneath really starts to emerge, and that changes things, as opposed to you deciding how you're supposed to be based on some cultural standard and then trying to mimic and perform that.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so
Mine is blown.
So I feel blessed right now, Scott, to have a guest like you that has really created a very unique path. Like, this is how you, I would assume, support yourself, right? You have this gift of experience using a technique that's very unorthodox in a way. And I can see the attractiveness to people that have, it's like what I teach, when they're ready to have that experience. And sometimes, same with me, I've had students over the years just show up in my class because they had a friend that was going and they said, you should go. And they think they know yoga, but then what I'm teaching, I don't even call it yoga that much anymore. It's yoga inspired movement, because the label, I'm sure at some point that might happen to a practice like what you're offering. But right now, yoga to me it's a senseless word in a way because of the way it's been applied.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Wow. Crystal, did you kind of been, more silent? I don't know if there's anything you kind of want to circle back to or ask or
No, I mean,
comment.
I've asked the important things that I wanted to ask. This really is a different dynamic. I'm here. I guess I was experiencing my own darkness while listening to you and then listening to Peter, just being in that receptive space of what's being offered. So yeah, I'm good. I'm loving the conversation, the insights that you're sharing. And I love that Peter is now like all about like, yeah, what's this darkness?
Well, I was curious when you talked about Scott, and now I'm even more curious because I've been talking with Scott. And Scott, this platform, the last thing I wanted to do was start a podcast. But then Israel and Crystal showed up in my life on the internet, and that in and of itself is always a little cautious for me because I'm not really that technically oriented, and I use it because it's a part of my business, but I'd rather be with people or rather have my own experiences, not on a screen. But the coincidences of us coming together, one being that I've lived almost 50 years now of living with the practice of yoga. And it's come to me that the most valuable teacher that I have access to is within. And the more intimacy that I can create with that voice, whatever that thing is that I have reference to, that's come after all these years of experience. And when I got to know Crystal, she was saying how she's been in the yoga world 10, 15 years, and she's already arrived at that place. It took me probably 35 to 40 years to get to that place, going through more traditional schools of yoga. And it just felt like a good fit. She's hilarious. I don't know how well you know her, but I've gotten to know her, and I really use humor in a amateurish way compared to Crystal, and yeah.
Not that funny.
Well, that video that you produced for Manduka, that's not amateurish. That's a skilled person who is able to communicate using humor and to present it as humor. So I just in awe of having a person like Crystal as a co-host, and to do this by myself. I've years ago, I'd say 5 years ago now, I just came to that place in my life where being a monk on a mountaintop just wasn't that attractive to me. That collaboration and community is more important. And Crystal brings a presence on this two-dimensional reality that is a gift. I mean, technology is one thing when it's supporting humans' connection, and another thing when it's distracting human connection. This to me is one of those uses of technology where it's supporting human connection, and it's been a pleasure at meeting you.
Yeah, it's been great
Indeed.
sitting and chatting with you both. And yeah, it's an amazing, like, just to really unpack what's underneath it all. There's so much sensationalism around spirituality, and and it's great. Like, I love the sensationalness of spirituality, and like it can, like, when that's what we're after, it ultimately not very sustainable. And I think that's one thing that I've definitely come to see in myself and through many others in their experience in the dark, that it's not that thing that remains. And that's like one of the things for some people that we'll return to. Like, you can reach your ideal in the dark, you might have a really big experience, but then like 10 minutes later, then what? It's like it's exhausting. But we don't really get pressed into the exhaustingness of it until, like, in a sense, we can't escape it. Like, nothing's going to change. So you're just in the constant exhaustion of trying to escape feeling trapped and uncomfortable. And like, but then when you finally are in the exhaust, then like somebody can feel exhausted, and then they can feel uncomfortable. And then there's that part of them that actually has the capacity, has the ability, has the humility to be uncomfortable. And then it's like a whole new world opens up. And
Yes.
yeah, it's humbling.
Do you ever, I mean, I don't know much about you, Scott, other than what Crystal has told me. Do you ever have a desire to write about this, like to
Yeah,
write a book about it?
it's definitely been something that I've thought about. I mean, writing's not, I like writing. Writing a book feels like um overwhelming. Like I wouldn't even know where to start. Like it's totally
Right.
not in my typical wheelhouse where I'm like, well, that sounds like a feat. But I think at some point, and I feel like we're still at the tip of the iceberg. Like we're 5 years in. I'm 5 years in. Adrian's 3 years in. A lot changed when she joined because I was in my total male dominated spiritual warrior push through. And that's how it was the first 2 years here. And then I totally got leveled and devastated. And things have changed and it's constantly evolving here because each person that comes through, we learn so much. Like if somebody came 3 or 6 months ago to now to 3 to 6 months from now, the way that we orient with people is going to change because we learned so much. There's so many new things or nuances that we like. The shame of people not leaving was new, like the eyes open and closed, and how a lot of people keep their eyes closed and they actually suck in their body in a certain way to keep from the darkness, like these nuances that since people aren't able to, since we're all not totally aware of the nuances of why we do what we do, it's like it takes a while to read between the lines, or one person comes and they totally crack. And then it's like, oh, that's what was happening. And there was a lot of people who were in that, but that particular thing didn't crack. And now we can see what was happening for that, like those types of people who are organized that way. So that's just to say, like, I feel like we're still early. Um, and so writing a book is something I'd love to co-write a book with Adrian as we really continue to get to evolve and really refine what's happening here.
I have a
Yeah.
story for you. I have a story
Uh-huh.
for you. So I went through a particularly dark time in my life where I had some health issues. I had divorce, people dying, suicide, etc. And so through that period in my life, I couldn't sleep. And the only thing that was calming to me was to do yoga. So like I'd wake up at 1 a.m. because I went to bed and then woke up and wide awake, and I'd practice in the middle of the night and sometimes practice right till 6 a.m. in the morning when I would go teach my class, 6 a.m. class. This went on for about a year and a half. I got accustomed to being, tired all the time. Not quite like when I had our child, when my wife had a child, and that kind of sleepless was different. This was more, solitude and the opportunity to just listen to myself in the middle of the night. Kind of a blackness cave experience in a way. And I kept these journals and I started writing cryptic notes in these journals. Those journals, 5 of them, sat on a shelf for 10 years. And the ideas in it took 10 years to kind of germinate into something. And right as I was at that point where I'm thinking, wow, I'm ready to write the book now. I get this email that I thought was someone. I had been teaching these workshops called Gravity and Grace at different places like Esalen here in California and stuff. And I get this email in the subject box. It says Gravity and Grace. And the first thing that came to my mind was, hey, someone's using my title, and then I see that it's from Sounds True. So I open it up, and in it is a message to me saying, hey, we saw your title we frequently are kind of trolling the Esalen catalog for book title, ideas. Would you write a book about Gravity and Grace? And it was just like, wow, I'm not a writer. The most I've ever written is 1,500 words. The book contract's 75,000 words. I go, how do I do that? And they said, well, listen, we'll give you an advance and we'll see you in a year and a half. And I go, no help. And they said, well, you're an expert, kind of thing. You'll do it. And then we'll get an editor and we'll finish it. So that's how my book happened. It's just some random thing, but it was waiting for that gestation period of 10 years to really consolidate. And then the nightmare of it is the process of writing is a very all-consuming thing. I had a young child trying to share parenting, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done, and it didn't take a year and a half. It took 3 years. And the last deadline, that publisher said, if you don't finish this time, you'll miss the editorial cycle and you might not be published for another 5. And so there was a real push to get it done. When it was done, it launched right before the pandemic, and the book tour that I had scheduled, everything got canceled as the lockdown started. And so here I have this new book and no one to share it with, other than trying to sell it online. And in that period of the pandemic, though, it somehow was noticed by a literary book award company that ended up giving my book the gold medal in wellness that year. And that was like, okay, and a little bit of an acknowledgement that this inspired place that I wrote that book, with the help of an editor who was fantastic, who I've never actually met in person, just talking on the phone and through emails, really coalesced into something that is really, for me personally, there's a contentment. That's the best word, that I kind of stepped up in a way that I felt really uncomfortable to expose in a very personal way some of my darkest moments on a page. But through this understanding of writing, came to see the value in it, of sharing it. And I wish that for you as well, because I just sense something in you that has a similar passion for what you do, and that it's the passion and the experiences that's what's inspiring. Like, you inspire me, and I'm sure there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people that will be inspired by you.
I'm
Thanks,
inspired
Peter.
too.
Thanks for sharing
Yeah.
that.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
All right.
That seems like a nice place to stop, don't you think?
I think so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
sometime in the future, I look forward to being here with you both. If you feel the draw and the pull, certainly you have my email, so touch in, and definitely love to be here with you both.
I look forward to it.
Yeah,
Me too.
beautiful.
Thank you. That's it for this episode. Be well and stay open to the teacher within. If you've enjoyed our time together, follow or subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming chats you don't want to miss.